because with Indian classical music, with Drupad in particular, because it's improvised, and like with everything, everything has ranges of improvisation. Like when you're talking about Drupad and you say, oh, alap is completely improvised. It's not completely improvised. You know what phrases work for that rag. You've spent decades like working out all of these different variations. You're just kind of rearranging based on your feeling. And the most improvisation that happens is um, in how you interpret those phrases at that moment. Um, in terms of like just all the small little details of how long should you hold, stay on this note, and which one should you like accent, and what kind of like dynamic arc that you would have. And I find it pretty similar to like interpreting Western classical, except you don't know what the next phrase is going to be. You know that you know the next phrase, um, but let me think about how. Yeah, so when you're doing this, there's certain moments where, and every Indian classical musician feels this. There's certain moments where you don't know what you want to play next because you kind of like disassociate a little bit for a second from the rug, and then you have to rely on like repertoire in your head or your like kind of arsenal of things that you can do, and instantly like it feels like the line is like getting disconnected, and then going back into it is like this thing that I've had to practice so much, where now it's gotten way easier to like go back into it. But definitely when I was first playing this, there would be so many times where 20 minutes of the concert it was feeling great at the start, and then one little thing happened that like disconnected it, and then you're just fighting to get back into that place where it feels like it's all connecting again and relying on just motor things. And like the most simplified way of putting it, I feel like I would love if over my career it just slowly got to where it's like first 20% of the performance feels like that, then like 60%, then 80%, and then all of the performances feel that kind of. I mean, that's kind of mostly what you do in Indian music, because the concept of a raga is so intangible. You kind of know, and it's so huge. Like if you think of like Rag Bhageshwari or Rag Yaman or something, you have this like intangible but very rich idea of what that feels like. And the whole point of the performance is you very, very slowly and carefully build up this vivid picture of that. Um, and when I play outside of Indian music, like if I'm playing like free or in any other way, there's times where you just wait and play a little bit on the piano and see what like catches your fancy, and then start chasing that around and finding things. And then there's other times where I know like what I want to feel like at that point of time, and I know, and this helps a lot. Indian classical music has helped a lot with this, where the fact that every single performance should be different, and taking time before you start playing to get attuned to not just your own, how you're feeling, but how the space is feeling. If there's people there, how are they feeling? And taking that like couple of minutes before you start playing to really like feel like what is needed, what would feel like right in this space. And it's music just feels so much better when that time is taken at the start, like, and in terms of like tempos of pieces, or whether it's starting off rubato or what register to start off, or like all of these kind of like little craft things like that come together to form a bigger whole. um, that's really been like one of the most crucial things that I've learned over the past few years, really like sensing and absorbing that space. So in a way, it's a premeditation of what's going to play, but it's also like happening right there in the moment, of it's particular to that concert in that room. And I've found ever since I've started doing that, um, the variety of what comes out has increased by a huge amount. Where earlier I would like say, oh, this composition in Rupak Tal, I usually play at like 80 BPM. So I know I'm going to start at somewhere between 75 or 85 over there. And then there's been times in the concert, like I'm feeling very like peaceful today. And I can feel like everyone in the room is feeling peaceful. We're sitting in a church, it's raining outside. It's got that very like meditative thing. So I'm going to, it's just like we started really, really slow and really like heavy and like ponderous and lots of space, and it's a it's really exciting to know that that's available to you. And I know in classical music you kind of you don't have that much liberty to do it because you're also battling like staying true to the composer, but I've heard pianists do very far off like versions from where you're supposed to be in terms of tempo, and I've absolutely loved it every single time. It really feels like they tune to the room. Probably won't win any competitions playing like that, but
That's not what it's all about, I guess,
no.
ultimately. It's so wonderful what you've just said. It's really interesting, and this whole thing. Let me just uh, let me just phrase it again so I know I've understood what you're saying. Were you implying that each raga has? You said it has a very deep feel. So
Yeah.
you basically understood the feel of this raga and what it means to convey the raga itself, and you take that feeling and then work with that feeling and kind of mold it into an improvisation. Am I
Yeah,
right?
that's how Indian classical music, North Indian classical music mostly works. Like there's so many analogies that people use for this, where raga is like a river and each phrase is like a bridge across that river, and slowly you build up like this big thing. Or like painting strokes, each rag, like you're like very carefully you like show a different side of it or different colors and things. But it's if you're looking at it clinically, a rag is like a bunch of phrases that sound very good, that you've culturally been conditioned, that work together, and there's whole bunch of intonational and thing relationships between these, and then there's some phrases that are like not at the core of the rag but used pretty often, which you won't stress on that much. You mostly go back towards the core ones, and then there's phrases that you do only for variety, where you're like dashing out for a second and coming back in, but all of this within like strict rules, where no one actually thinks that way when they're playing rugs. You have the image of the rug, and then you're like carefully balancing like when do you need to be reminded that we're in Bhimpalasi, and when do you like deviate for a second, you start doing like some kind of pattern based improvisation going somewhere else. And I guess the other point that I was trying to make was just, even if you're outside of rag, like wherever you're playing, just taking that time at the start to like let the room and the space and the instrument tell you how to play this, and as like uniquely for that moment, that's been like the biggest thing, because you like pianos speak back to you when you play them. You play one note and you instantly know, okay, the reverb is like this, and this, the pedal is like this, and the touch is like this, and these overtones are coming out of this thing, and all of this like subconsciously makes you change how you play the piece. And apart from just the piano, the space and the people, and like sensing that, and like you almost like feel collective breathing in the room when you're like sitting in a performance space. All of those things also go in to like make the performance feel more special. And it's a really weird thing to try to practice and get it going. Like there's times I've like sat there for 3-4 minutes before the concert going, I don't get it, I don't get the space yet. I just chill, and then people are wondering, did he forget the music, or uh,
Oh gosh. But it's so beautiful. This whole thing about feeling the space and listening to the instrument and listening to the people, and a lot of Indian musicians, both Hindustani and like South Indian classical, have said similar things about feeling the space and involving the audience. And as a Western musician, it was a first for me to hear. I mean, of course, I assume jazz as well. Jazz musicians probably think like this as well to a certain
yeah.
extent. I haven't spoken a lot to jazz musicians, but it seems to be very, you do seem to be quite free, isn't it? Like, on stage, and you express yourselves with a certain set of rules.
Yeah,
But I think what is this thing about the raga that you were saying, it's a certain set of phrases that work with each other, as opposed to when you think of a Western classical scale, and this is purely objectively, I'm thinking of, how the systems work or the composer's minds work when they work with these different scales. You are presented the scale, which is a major or a minor or a mode or maybe a 12 tone scale, but you're presented the scale, and then you
yeah,
create the phrase. This is in Western music. You create the
yeah,
phrases which you think will work together and create music like that. And there is, of course, I mean, depending on the era you're looking at, I guess classical is much more, what do you say, rule bound, and much more
yeah.
like you need to. But as you progress, that kind of starts to change over the different eras. And I think today there's a lot of experimentation going on with
Yeah,
this. But when you say about the raga, that these phrases that work together, and you've been cultured to listen to it, it's almost like, to my mind, you're not thinking of the scale, the notes of the scale. You're thinking of the phrases that work within the notes of that raga.
yeah, that's exactly how it works. Because if you think of just the notes, then it feels like you're just meandering on a mode a lot of the times, and you can make your own. There's so much room in within these phrases to like adapt and like join together and find a new way of saying it. But each rag has these like people talk a lot about like pakad, which is like the phrases that you play to catch a rag, and usually in most books they summarize it as like two or three phrases, and that's fine. Like there's those phrases are usually correct, but it's a lot more than that, because the way that you learn is just your teacher plays a phrase, you play it back, plays another phrase, usually very little talking or very little like explaining, and then you like gradually figure out. He seems to go back to this a lot. We've had like 10 lessons so far of like doing this, and these are the phrases that I remember in my head, because I don't record. You don't record lessons or things. The ones that stick from these long lessons of just imitating what he's doing, those are the ones that you get are important. And on different days, different ones will be important. And the more lessons you have, and the more you listen to the recordings and like explore yourself, you figure out which ones seem to be like the kind of foundational pillars of the rag. And you also learn how much variety is in that one scale or that one little phrase,
Yeah.
which it's like so melodic based. It's incredible because this was when I first started off playing this. I literally thought, because I was 11 years old, that rags are great. It's like you just get to solo play whatever you want, make it up. And I was way more interested in like learning the patterns and the fancy rhythms and um, like figuring those things out, because that's the bits that I remembered from hearing. And then the more I go into it, it's just like, how beautifully can this person play this phrase that's in Rag Bhim Palasi?
Mm.
And how beautifully does he set up a phrase where he plays like a little bit of it, then deviates off and goes somewhere, then plays another little bit, goes somewhere else, and then 3 minutes later he'll play the whole phrase, and you know he's been thinking of that long phrase and slowly teasing you with little bits of it. um, that's where the real magic in Indian classical music is